Welcome back to That's Life with John Carver. Today, my guest is my friend Ken Rupert. Ken, thanks for being on the show today.
John, thanks for having me.
We have titled this episode A Boy Named Daniel, and the big picture today is we're going to share the story of Ken's son, whose name is Daniel. But first, a little introduction about Ken. Ken is an author. He's written a boatload of books. Look him up online. You're going to be very much impressed. He's an educator. He lives by what he teaches. He takes care of one of his parents who are very ill. And he has mastered some techniques that we're going to share at the end of the show that will, if you follow them, will change your life in a big way. So Ken, if you could share with all of us where you grew up, what was your childhood like, and we're going to get into your story.
Okay. Well, actually, my childhood was very average, right? I guess for the time it was average. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s and graduated high school in the 80s. I actually started in Wisconsin, and then before 13 we moved to Ohio. And I was in my glory in Ohio because, first of all, I like the Ohio State Buckeyes. I hope nobody out there will hold that against me. But I like the Ohio State Buckeyes, so we were moving to Ohio, and I was stoked. And I played football, so I was thinking that, I will go to college. That'll be an awesome opportunity to be living in the state where I can go to Ohio State. And as it was, time went on, and I wasn't as good as I needed to be in order to be brought into the college ranks. So instead, I went and joined the military. And I got to do some traveling. I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and then ended up in Aberdeen Proving Grounds here in Maryland. And throughout that opportunity to travel, I ended up over in Europe. And when I came back from Europe, I decided, instead of going back to my home of records, which was Ohio, I decided I would stay in Maryland for one reason, was my parents had moved back to Maryland because at that time my grandmother had gotten sick, my mom's mother. So they moved back to take care of her, and I found myself living in Maryland. Okay. And that's kind of how I got here.
And how old were you then when you moved back to Maryland?
When I moved back to Maryland, I was 22.
22, so you're very young.
Yes.
So what field were you in back then? What type of jobs did you have at that age range?
So I started off with the basic minimum wage jobs.
Okay.
Came out of the military, I was actually working 3 jobs.
Okay.
The one job I was working at a warehouse because I did supply in the military, so it was a natural transition to get into supply. So I was working in a warehouse, and then I was still in the National Guard for Maryland because I wanted to obviously be able to continue to serve, but at the same time have that little bit of extra income, what I call passive income, where, it's passive, it's active for 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer.
Right.
And then I actually worked at a couple different bars. I worked at a bar down in College Park for a while, and then I ended up working out in Laurel for a while. So a myriad of different minimum wage or just above minimum wage jobs to make ends meet.
So there came a time where you met this young lady named Karen. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that story and how that all happened.
We actually met on a blind date, of all things. I was playing softball on a church league, and one of the men that I was playing ball with, his wife worked with my soon-to-be wife. I didn't know she was going to be my soon-to-be wife, but as it worked out, Barry could not make it to the company crab feast. So Mary Jo, his wife, said, "Why don't you come, and I have somebody I want you to meet." And so it was kind of interesting when I stood there with Mary Jo. We were looking for this person that I didn't know, and I don't know why I was looking for her. Right? I didn't know what she looked like.
Right.
And my Mary Jo looked at me and says, "Oh, there she is," and I just turned real quick and looked over the field, and I'm like, "Oh, I see her," and she's like, "How do you know that's her?" And I'm like, I just know.
Really?
Yeah, I just knew it was her. And so we ended up playing volleyball on the same team that night, and then sitting down and having some crabs. And she didn't drink beer, but at that time I drank beer, so had some crabs and beer. And that night, when we were getting ready to depart, I asked her if she'd be interested in going to my company picnic. And she said sure. So I remember she took out a book of stamps tore the stamps out of it and wrote down her phone number on that.
Really?
Yeah, that's how we met.
That's cool.
And the following week we went out, and this is how I knew that we were going to get married. The following week we went out to my company picnic, and after my company picnic, it ended around 4 o'clock. And I looked at her and I said, well, would you like to go out and catch a movie or something? I mean, it's still early. And she looked at her watch and she goes, it's 4 o'clock. And I'm like, yeah. And she said, there's a football game on. And I said, a football game? I said, you'd rather go back and watch football? And she said, yes. And I'm like, that's it.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, because,
so cool.
Being a big football fan and stuff like that, it was just a natural fit. And so that's how we kind of met, and it grew from there. And within 6 months, we were engaged.
Really?
Yeah, it took us 21 months to get married, but
Is
it took
that
us 6
so?
months to get engaged. I pretty much knew that at that point she had a lot of the same interests I had. So
Now, how did she view you? I mean, you talked about how you saw in her a lot of the stuff you really liked.
Yeah.
What was the attraction to you from her?
I don't think I've ever asked her that
Is
question.
that so? Really?
Maybe I don't want to know.
Okay.
But when Mary Jo had talked to her about me, she had said, he's big, like he plays football and stuff. And of course, that instantly made a connection.
Okay.
And I think just if I had to guess, I would say it's probably my level of confidence, my level of, for lack of a better term, like a go-get life kind of attitude.
Okay.
I don't let things hold me back. I never have let things hold me back.
Okay.
I would never be accused of being shy. And I think that I had a very outgoing personality, and I was just kind of fun-loving and willing to try new things and be adventuresome. And I think that she likes to do things outside, so I think that kind of made it an attraction for us.
It's like a great pair. I mean, you're like meant to be. It was really a very interesting story.
I mean, I never described it meant to be, but there, as time goes on, you kind of learn that there are things that just work. And there's things that don't work, and those things that don't work are the things you have to work on.
Well said.
Right?
I like that a lot. That's true, isn't it?
There are things that work.
It really is.
Yeah.
So you were engaged for half a year, or no, you got engaged after half a year,
yes.
And then you were courted for
21 months.
21 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then there came a time when you found out that you were going to be a dad.
Yeah.
How did that?
That was
what's the behind the scenes story about
That was
that?
a very interesting thing because I came home from work and I sat down on the couch like I normally did. I would sit down and watch some TV, watch the news or whatever. And she came over and she handed me a pregnancy test.
Okay.
And I looked at it and I'm thinking, I don't know how to read these things.
Yeah, for real, you're a guy.
You're giving a guy a pregnancy test.
Right, exactly.
So I looked at it and I'm like, it's okay. We can always try again, right? And she's like, no, that means we're expecting.
Wow.
And I'm like, whoa, okay, all right. And we actually kind of, the way she told me was right around Father's Day.
Okay.
So she was actually, found out that she was pregnant right in June. And so that was kind of my Father's Day gift, for lack of a better term, right?
Right.
And so that night I'm sitting there on the couch, on the computer, looking at things. And she looked over and she goes, what are you doing? And I said, I'm calculating. And she says, are you calculating whether we can afford this? And I said, no, I'm calculating what we're going to do. Because I had already figured that we were going to be able to afford it. One way or the other, we'd figure it out.
Right.
But I was starting to think college funds. So I was out looking at college funds because I didn't have the opportunity to go to college right out of high school. And by golly, my child was going to have that opportunity. So I had looked at some college funds and already started planning. So even before he was a month and a half old, he had a college fund.
Wow.
Because I was going to make sure he was going to be able to make it. And I figured I had 18 years to build it.
Right.
I would have done something right.
So you were employed at the time when your wife found out she was going to have a baby. What type of job was that back then?
Okay, so both of us were employed. I was a telecommunications engineer.
Okay.
And she worked at a computer company as in the training department.
Okay.
So, that computer company is no longer around, and I got laid off many years later. So,
wow.
Neither one of us work for those companies anymore.
So the pregnancy, explain the evolution of how that went, and then the big day.
That's where things are kind of, when it's your first child, you don't understand what should be going on, and
Right.
so you're reading a lot. But what we noticed is that she was not progressing as well as she needed to. She was not getting very big. She had gone for a couple of checkups, routine checkups, and the doctor would measure her belly and realize that the child wasn't growing what he would expect the child to grow. So they gave us a couple options. You know, it was like, well, we could do an amniocentesis and see what's going on, because one of the blood tests came back and it kind of indicated possibly Down syndrome. And that, of course, scared my wife. It made me concerned because I'm sitting there thinking, nah, I don't think this is what we bargained for. But the question we had to answer was, do we want to take the risk of the amniocentesis and possibly kill the baby, because those can lead to miscarriages and stuff?
Right.
Or did we want to just trust God and, you know, whatever happened, happened?
Mm-hmm.
So we decided the opposite. We decided the latter of the two. And it wasn't progressing. And so we had another appointment scheduled. And that morning, I remember very distinctly, we both got up and both went to work. We had a half a day. So we met back at the house, and then I drove her down to the hospital, to the doctor's office. And the doctor measured, and the baby had kind of stopped moving at that point. And so he had this little buzzer that he would buzz the belly, and it would stimulate a reaction from the baby. Well, the baby didn't react. So he thought the baby would do better outside the womb than inside the womb. So he sent us over to be induced. So this is now, his due date was February 14th. Which was kind of appropriate, right? I mean, I find out on Father's Day we're going to have a baby on February 14th. What could be more perfect, right?
Sure,
Well,
of course.
This was in January, so we realized that it was not going to play out.
Right.
So we got over to the hospital, and if I paid attention to one thing during the parenting class or the birth classes, was that my job as the father was to watch the monitor and make sure that when the contractions happen, the heart rate's maintained what it needed to maintain. It was actually expected to go up. And I noticed that when she said a contraction was coming on, that his heart rate would dive. And that didn't seem right to me. So I asked her, I said, very calm, I didn't want to upset her. So I said very calmly, are you thirsty? And she said, yes. And I said, well, I'll go out and get something to drink for you. So I walked out and I instantly went right to the nurse. And I said, I think you need to come in here and look at this. This doesn't look right. And I just, my spider senses were up. And the nurse came in and looked at it, and she was very calm too, didn't like freak out about it. And then she started to get oxygen ready. And my wife looked at me and she goes, I don't need oxygen, I'm feeling fine. And I told her, I said, honey, just take the oxygen. And that's when she knew that something was not right. And then of course she looked at me and she goes, what's wrong? And I'm like, I'm not a doctor, I don't know what's wrong, but I just know that something's not right.
Right.
And then it was a whisk away to an emergency C-section. As soon as he was born, he was out of the room, and there her and I were in recovery. Now they took me down to see him. He was in the NICU. He didn't look so good. And I think that I can remember standing and looking over him, and he just, we didn't know what was going to happen. But he was in the NICU for 17 days, and he came home shortly after his due date.
Really?
Yeah, and that time was very traumatic because we didn't have family around us, so it was just her and I that were trying to figure out what was going on, why was this happening, and what it was.
Wow.
So it was stressful.
To say the least.
Yeah.
So as parents, when you're faced with a child that is struggling, how do you go from that day to every day after that, knowing that your child's not going to potentially be like the average child that we see in our neighborhoods?
So if I were to say one thing to your viewers, okay, what I would tell them is that it's a difficult transition, but it happens in an instant, right? You start off expecting parents, and then you're new parents, and you realize that all of a sudden it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be everybody else's experience. And maybe some of the people out there have seen that or felt that or had that experience, but the one thing we didn't do, and which I encourage anybody who's facing any kind of traumatic situation, is don't put your head in the sand. Don't deny what's happening. try to work through it, try to manage it. And we didn't bury our heads in the sand. What we tried to do was we tried to say, okay, we don't know what this is. We don't like what's going on, but we had to acknowledge that this was going to be a transition from new parents to caregivers in a matter of seconds. And that transition happened so quickly, but I'll tell you, your mind, your intellect, your heart, your emotions, they don't catch up for quite a while.
I agree.
You know, you're an instant caregiver, but mentally and emotionally, you don't know what's going on. And it's very confusing and it's very, very stressful. So don't bury your head in the sand. If you're going to face something, it's best to admit it and try to move forward, not move on, but move forward with what you're experiencing.
So you named your son Daniel.
Yes.
So when he was born, his diagnosis was what? Explain that to all of us.
So he didn't have a diagnosis.
Okay.
He had low blood sugar. He was jaundice. He was going to be in the NICU. He had poor feeding. He didn't have the ability to feed, so we had to gavage feed him through a tube down his nose. So I can remember going in the NICU and getting the breast milk in the syringe, and then I would pop the syringe and it would start draining into his stomach. That's how I fed him for his first 2 weeks. Oh. And then one day we came in and we expected to do the same thing. I was basically taking half a day at work, and then I would come in for the half a day and I would feed him. And we came in one day and there was this baby crying, and they said, "That's your baby." For some reason, he turned a corner. It took us 4 years to get a diagnosis.
And that was what?
That was Sotos syndrome. It's a rare genetic disorder. It's a deletion of the NSD1 gene. I don't want to get too technical, but it basically means that there's a protein switch that's turned off, and that creates overgrowth. And so his bones are going to grow much faster than the average child. And when he has a growth spurt, it's going to be much more severe than the average child. The problem with that is he also had cerebral palsy because there was a blood disorder that my wife didn't know she was a carrier of, which caused blood clots in the placenta and the umbilical cord. So he literally almost starved himself to death in utero. That's why he would do better outside of the womb than in. And that has tight muscles. So here you have this combination of tight muscles and bones that grow much faster than the muscles can grow.
Wow.
And so it actually started distorting his legs, where it was turning his legs out. So when he walked, his feet would be pointing out, but his knees were pointed in.
Whoa.
So it really twisted him. So
was that painful for him, or no?
It didn't appear to be painful. What happened in order to correct it became painful when he had to face the orthopedic surgeries where they actually went in and cut his thigh bone in half and derotated his leg. Wow. And then put plates in to hold those bones in place. And they had to do the same thing on his lower legs. They had to cut both of the bones all the way through and derotate his feet.
Oh my gosh.
And he's been through 10 of those surgeries.
Holy moly.
But he's kind of beyond that now. One of the other things with overgrowth is it affects the organs, and he's ended up having to have a surgery to remove one of his kidneys because it had a blockage, and it basically killed the kidney. In that process, the doctor told us, so it's about a 3.5-hour surgery. Well, 6.5 hours later, he finally came out. Wow. It was a very intense surgery. We didn't know what to expect. I mean, you got to imagine, we spent 3 days in the hospital, didn't shower, didn't shave, eating hospital food, just making sure that he was taken care of. And those are the nights that you don't wish upon anybody. Yeah, those are pretty tough nights.
So as a result of his challenges, you made a decision some years ago to, I'll tell you what, you share that story.
Yeah. So there was a time when we laid him down for his first surgery. You have to picture this. You walk into this operating room. I've never been in an operating room before. There's a metal table, and they lay him up on the metal table. And then the doctor said, "Yeah, it's better for you to put him out instead of us coming at him." So they gave me the mask, and I was bent down. I was trying to, talk to him and let him know he's going to feel some air blowing on his face and that he'll go to sleep, because he had no clue as to what was coming. The hard part was having to make that decision and knowing what your child is going to go through, but not being able to explain it to them. So as I put the mask on his face, he has a way of crying out for me. He would say, "I need daddy, I need daddy, I need daddy." He would say it over and over again. And at some point, I guess right before the mask got on his face, he realized, Daddy's not going to help me. And so then he yelled out, "I need mama." And at that moment, I realized that, you know what, Daddy's not always going to be here to take care of you. There's going to come a time where somebody else is going to be trusted with that. And that's going to require financial resources. And I made a decision at that point that I was going to study the billionaires. I was going to try to understand how they became billionaires so I could build the resources I would need to pay for my son's care 40 years beyond my death.
Repeat that again, that last piece.
Yeah. I had to make the decision that I was going to build the financial resources necessary in order to pay for my son's care 40 years after my death.
All right, we have 6 minutes or so to go.
Okay.
Explain to all of us how you went about making that happen and what you've been able to accomplish for Daniel so far.
So I studied billionaires because if anybody knows how to make money and keep money, it's a billionaire.
Right.
I didn't want to become a billionaire, but I figured if I could just replicate 1% of what they did, that he would have enough money for his care.
Right.
Now, in the process of all this stress of taking care of a special needs child and the surgeries and all these different things, that stress is high level. It's what I call stagnant stress. It's always there. I had given myself over to medicating behaviors, which was my medication was food. So I had worked my way up to 300 pounds. And at some point I realized that, you know, it's great if Daddy has money for him, but if Daddy's not here, it's not going to be so great. So I had to figure out a way to get my discipline back, my physical discipline back. So I decided to go back and study martial arts. So I was studying martial arts, and as I was working my way up through the belt ranks, what I started realizing as my weight was coming off, my discipline was coming back. And what I realized was the principles and strategies and goals that I had set financially perfectly aligned with the belt structure of martial arts. And so in that process, what I did was I started lining up and saying, hey, you know, white belt, this is what you need to accomplish. And yellow belt, this is the next thing I needed to accomplish. And you go right through the belt structure. And by the time a person gets to first degree financial black belt, they are a net worth millionaire. They have taken care of all their debt. They have a tier 3 emergency fund. They have an operating budget that is just phenomenal. And it's not only just a physical thing with money, it's a mental thing. So it creates a mental discipline, which is what I needed because of the amount of stress I had.
Right.
And I've been able to achieve the second degree financial black belt, which is basically a net or a gross financial assets millionaire, which means you take out the value of your home, you take out the value of your cars and stuff like that, and it's just what you have in the bank and in investments. I'm working on my third degree, which is just a retirement millionaire where it's just in tax favored accounts. And what I decided to do was I'm like, look, this process worked. I proved it. And my son's going to be okay. And if anybody out there wants to understand, that's the most important thing is that you're making the right decisions to get to the place where you can care for your son or your daughter, whichever one it is. If you're in my situation, you're going to want that. That security helps because when we faced a hospital visit, we didn't face a financial emergency at the same time. And so I packaged it all up and put it in a book and put it out there on Amazon.
So you teach this?
I do teach it, yes.
And where would people want to go to learn what you know for their family?
If somebody wants to see if this is something that would work for them, they could go to the website, which is financialblackbelt.us, and kind of read up and kind of get a feel for it. And they certainly could buy the book. And what I would do is I would just meet with them either through email or maybe a Skype session or something like that, right, where they could ask questions and we can kind of get a feel for exactly what it is they're facing and what their goals are. I mean, I didn't set huge financial goals when I started. I had one financial goal. It was to care for my son.
So you don't use a broker, you don't use an agent, you learned all this yourself, you studied it, you mastered the art of investing and mastered the skill sets that the billionaires use, and transferred that knowledge to yourself and for your family, and more importantly, for your son.
Yes, exactly. And the concept is that I don't do any investing for anybody. I do not do that. I don't have the licenses, and I don't want that. What I want to do is I want to teach people how to do it for themselves.
Got it.
And even if you get up to the purple belt, which at that point you have no consumer debt, and you have a fully funded emergency fund that equals 1 year of gross salary, you'll be okay.
Right.
You know, that's financial stability. And then if you go on and you get the brown belt and the brown senior, or red senior, and red black belt, now you're moving on to financial independence. And once you start working into the black belt ranks, you become a prodigious accumulator of wealth, because you can't help but accumulate wealth when you have the knowledge on how to do it.
And all this started was because of a sick little boy.
Because of a sick little boy named Daniel. That's where it all started.
Awesome story, Ken.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, John.
Guys, thanks for being here on the show today, and we'll be back real soon. Thanks so much.